Hello and welcome to Choose Agape. Sorry for the break, and I'm delighted to be back after a few months with a fantastic guest today, Ciro Candia, who is a father of 7 and was a headmaster for 25 years. Is that right, Ciro?
That's correct. 25 years, yes.
25 years, and also father of a wonderful young man that you may have seen an interview with on this channel of Tom Candia, who spoke with me probably about 6-7 months ago, and you can catch that interview as well. A young man to be proud of. He's great, and it's lovely to have you, his father, here to speak with today, really about parenting primarily, and some of the struggles that parents face today. But shall we begin? If you tell us a little bit about yourself then, Chiro.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Catherine, for inviting me on and to have this time with you and to discuss the work that I'm currently doing, and also to commend the work that you're doing. Having read some of your articles recently, I can see that you're a real defender of the family. So, thank you for everything that you do, really. So, as you mentioned, I was the headmaster of Oakwood School for 25 years, and I was a founding teacher of the school back in 1996. And then, after a quarter of a century, I decided to step down. It's a long time being a head, 25 years, but also to fulfill my mission to parents in a different way by starting up these hubs in my capacity as founder of Pro Parent. And so these hubs that I've started up around the country, 4 to 8 couples, there are approaching 25 of these hubs that I've started since last December. And I also run a number of conferences and so on. And alongside that work, as in my pro-parent capacity, I'm also an educational consultant for the trust that owns the school that I was head of. And what I'm doing is now developing a mentoring life coaching program for 15 to 18-year-olds with a number of people. That's really tremendously exciting work, going into the sixth forms and working with these young people to try and get them ready for that transition to university and beyond. And as you've mentioned, married to Caroline, 7 children, and Tom, I just couldn't believe that interview. Suddenly he kind of was transformed into this mature young man that I didn't recognize. So well done for accelerating his maturity during that interview. And what am I trying to do, really, Catherine, with these hubs? I mean, as I say, fundamentally to fulfill the mission that I had to parents as a head, to help them raise their children to become competent, responsible young men and women who are going to lead their lives by noble principles, no matter the cost, really, no matter the cost. I think the long-term aim or goal of any parent should be to raise their children to become a great mother, father, husband, wife, later on, people of great character. And I mean, there's I think I can't remember where it is in the book of Proverbs, but this idea that knowledge, wisdom, and understanding is what brings stability and peace to a home. So what I'm trying to do, really, with this pro-parent initiative is to bring some of that knowledge, that wisdom, and understanding, those insights that I've acquired over 30 years as an educator, observing thousands of families during that period, and really just to provide parents with those insights and those observations, really.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And maybe tease that out a little bit more later, and you can tell us who it's aimed at and how to get involved and how it's been
Sure.
going and what it looks like. Um, if I start by asking you what we mean, we often talk about parents as primary educators, parents as first educators. This is something in the Catholic world. It's something we're very familiar with. It's from our catechism, but I think sometimes it's said and people don't really know what we mean by that. And so we have the difference between education, first of all, and schooling as such. What do we mean when we say parents are primary first educators?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question, really at the heart of this initiative, really, because in the word pro-parent, pro stands for championing parents' rights and responsibility, but the pro also stands for proactive, right? This idea that, that parents really need to exercise their parental authority, their parental leadership, if they're going to raise great people in the future, really. And I think, you know, underlying this idea of parents as primary educators is first of all this understanding that, you know, it's parents who have the rights and the responsibility for raising their children, not the state or any kind of ideology. You know, I think Catherine Berbelsing in some of her articles last week was, after reading your piece, one or two other things kind of popped up during that week, and she very much talks about this crisis in parental leadership, really. So this idea that, I think she mentions that parents are shying away from some of their responsibilities to raise their children. And what I've tried to communicate as a head teacher and also in this initiative is that parents as primary educators, you know, it really means fundamentally that they have the responsibility, they have the right to form their children in virtue, in freedom, and really importantly in conscience. Yeah, in conscience. You know, many years ago, my daughter, who's now 24 or 5, sorry, I forget, forgive me. I mean, they range between 27 and 17, and now so many of them are in their 20s that I've forgotten. Hopefully not going to hear this. But anyway, when she was 12, my oldest daughter said to me that sometimes when I'm tempted to do the wrong thing, I hear your voice in my head telling me not to, right? And I thought to myself, wow, this is the best definition of conscience that I've heard. So I quickly jotted it down. Thought, right, I'm going to use this in my talks, really. But that's what the job of a good parent is. You know, our job is really to kind of form them in conscience, so that one day those parental lessons of right and wrong will form the way they think about things in the world. So when they're faced with those important decisions and they're facing those crises or setbacks, it's the voice of mum and dad that they're going to hear in their heads. And I think ultimately in this role as primary educators, we know when we've done our job well, when perhaps two things have happened, really. I think the first thing, that our children have freely, and this is really important, freely chosen to do what is good and right without being told to. That's number one. That's you know, that's when we know that our children have kind of, we've been successful in raising them. And the other thing is when they freely choose to take responsibility for looking after others, really putting others first. And those are the criteria that I often say to parents, that in your role as primary educators is what we're trying to achieve, really, more than anything else. Yeah. Because I think, Catherine, really, the reality is that right now we live in a society which basically says, you know, we know how to mold your child, right? So we know how to raise them, and to raise them in this kind of new liberated code, which pretty much says, you know, maximize pleasure, avoid pain. You know, if it feels good, then do it. You know, this kind of thing, really. And for 99% of human history, I think it was parents who were the primary shapers of their children. This last 1%, in the last 5 minutes of civilization, the state and ideologies have taken over, and they're the ones who are now calling the shots. You know, they're the ones who are the primary movers and shapers, and we need to reclaim that ground.
That's very true. I think you've used some terms there that that are problematic, that we find difficult to hear in the culture. Parental authority. Authority is a word we balk at. And good parent, as if there is such a thing as a good parent, as if there is something objectively good about certain ways of raising our children and not others. And conscience, that's a huge one. Yeah. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because we don't like to hear about authority when we're talking about, we think it's judgmental or good parenting. You can parent however you want. And yet there's this acceptance of the way things are delivered through schools, that what people don't seem to realize is they are accepting certain ways as good and certain authorities, but they're not necessarily digging into why they would accept that, but don't seem to be able to relate that to their own role as parents, that it's okay to say that they have parental responsibility, parental authority, that it's not a bad word. And so a couple of things I want to ask is what do you think, what do you see as the specific threats to parental responsibility? You've mentioned some there, but anything you can sort of clearly identify and say this is a real point of threat that we need to guard against? And also conscience, how might we better understand it outside of just using it to justify doing whatever we feel like? Yes, it is this sort of, Aquinas talks about this synderesis, this awareness of right and wrong, and then the action, the conscientia. But it needs to be formed, doesn't it? So how can we help people to understand better the idea of a formed conscience and an informed conscience, rather than just an excuse to say, well, it feels right, I'll do it. So there's a lot in that, but basically,
Wow, gosh,
yeah, the threats that we
so
face
much.
specifically as parents today, and what we really mean by conscience.
Well, perhaps let me take your second question first, really. I mean, I think it was Archbishop Fulton Sheen who said that right is right, even if no one is right, and wrong is wrong, even if everyone is wrong, right? And I think it's important that when we're talking about forming our children's conscience, is that we see our role as helping to shape our children's habits and attitudes, really. And I think so often when people say, I mean, I used to ask parents when they came to the school, what is it that you want for your children? And so often parents would say to me, independence. This was the big thing that they wanted for their children. And independence is a good thing, right? It's a good thing, but that can't be our only goal, right? Because a potted plant is independent, really. So
Right.
children being able to tie their shoelaces and being able to look after themselves and so on and so forth is a good goal. Of course it is, but it's not really the ultimate goal, because I think what we're trying to do in this battle of conscience, if you like, to form our children's conscience, is really to take our children from self, this independence, if you like, from self to others to God. Really, this is the moral development that we want to kind of help our children in, really. And so what does it mean from self to others to God, really? Well, as I was saying before, an important criteria for shaping our children's conscience is whether or not they put other people first, and then we have that relationship with God, as I said, knowing that there is that there is a objective right, and there are eternal truths. And I mean, another way of thinking about this, really, Catherine. Sorry, I'm going all over the place, and I apologise, but I will get back. But just as ideas pop into my head is that this idea of the pleasure, happiness, joy triangle, really. So if you can imagine at the bottom of that triangle pleasure, then we've got the next level up, which is happiness, and then we have joy, really. And what is the goal for parents? So unfortunately, for many young people, and even for many families, they're living at the bottom end of that triangle, just pleasure. So it's all about instant gratification. It's about satisfying whims and appetites, and that's where it's all about me and independence and self and so on and so forth. Well, happiness, which is the next level up, I mean, that's much more about long-term goals, long-term, what's in our best long-term interests. And that's often about how not just about our happiness, but we're truly happy when we're putting other people first. So we come back to this idea of self again. So we can be really truly happy if we put other people first. But what we're really trying to help our children on that journey is to get to joy, really. And joy is that alignment with God's will. It's that life of holiness, that life of, as I say, aligning ourselves with God's will. And so that battle of formation, if you like, or that battle of conscience, is to try and take them through this journey. So from self to others to God. I've forgotten what your first question was.
I
Catherine,
think
sorry.
it's because I put them all together.
Yes.
That was a really beautiful answer, by the way. I think that's brilliant. That it's so true that, also it's that idea of love and pain being a package deal. That pleasure that you might get from eating a bar of chocolate, having a nice meal, having a glass of wine, that's really nice. But it's a different sort of joy and happiness that you have from having a
Yes.
child. But having a child is going to give you pain that eating a bar of chocolate won't.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and I think that even has got to the point now where it's putting people off having children and all the other worries they have, because they only see the pain that might be caused by it, the sleepless nights, the changing of the nappies, the seeing your child suffer.
Yeah.
But it's a strange sort of joy. You'll know this as a father of 7, and I have children of my own, and any parent can testify to this. That sort of paradox of love, that joy that is so much deeper and so much richer than mere pleasure and simple happiness. And so I think that's a beautiful illustration of that triangle, and how so many in the culture are not necessarily through their own fault, are stuck at the bottom of the triangle,
Exactly.
unable to see the top, which is why what you're doing, which we'll talk about again, is so important. And I think what I had asked about was anything you want to mention as specific threats to parents today that you think is that we can identify as trying to break that link between parents and child and place them more into the arms of the state than family.
You know, this is a really, really important area, and you know, in your piece, Catherine, you kind of mentioned a number of important areas about parents being more involved, reviewing school policies, transparency, all that kind of thing. And I think this is such an important message, because when in effect we outsource that formation, when we don't take that responsibility of forming our children in virtue, in freedom, in conscience, and so on, and we subcontract that, if you like, to the state, then I think there are many consequences that follow, and we need to be aware of that, and some of the dangers, as you put it, really. I mean, I think first of all, I think there is the danger to the parents themselves, right? Because I think what's happening with this outsourcing, if you like, is that parents are completely losing their confidence, right? And what's happening, and I can see all the time that when parents lose their confidence and then they get knocked down because of all the various things that are happening around them, they don't always get up. They burn out, and this is a consequence of not being able to have a very clear mission and clear identity as a parent. So. Parents who say things like, and I've heard parents say to me, what's happened to my kids? Maybe this 6-year-old who was sitting with me on the sofa, cuddling up to me, reading a book, watching a film. Now at the age of 14 or 15 is in their room, always on their phone, hidden away, only comes down to raid the fridge occasionally, this kind of thing. And they say to me, what's happened, right? They just don't know. So parents utterly confused and really losing their confidence. But I think as far as the kids are concerned, the consequences of all of this, I mean, I think probably just two that come to mind, Catherine. I mean, one is that the danger here is that children don't just rebel, right, but they actually end up rejecting, right, the parental lessons of right and wrong, those parental values, or those values that have been handed down through the generations. I mean, we as teenagers rebelled. I mean, I was a nightmare for my parents, being an only child, being brought up in an Italian family, and I gave my parents hell, really. But whatever rebellion, some kids rebel, some don't in the teenage years, some little or some a lot. But I think in the past, if and when kids rebelled, they always kind of came back to the parental blueprint, really, to those values and so on. And I think a real danger at the moment is that kids are not coming back. Right? So what they're doing is they're outright rejecting, really. They're outright rejecting some of those parental values and lessons. So that's a real danger. And I think the other danger, connected with this rejection rather than rebellion, is that I think these poor kids are really disconnecting more and more from reality, right? More and more from reality. And I think the more you disconnect from reality, the more or the less likely you are to be able to cope with the setbacks, with the difficulties that will happen in life, and this will lead to the disastrous marriages, to kind of breakdowns, all sorts of consequences. I mean, I used to say to my kids growing up that God as our maker knows what's real, right? He knows what's real. He knows what is true and what's in our best interest. But if we move away from that, if we move away from that reality, from those truths, that's going to have consequences, right? That's going to have consequences. And I think what's happening in schools with with the whole business of self-identification and so on, is that these kids are just moving away further and further away from reality, really. And the more we do that, the consequences are quite profound, really, and very disturbing.
Yeah, that's so true. Again, so beautifully put. I love that. God is our maker and knows what's real. And we need that. We need that. We need to be grounded in some kind of reality. And I think it's fair to say, as dark as things sometimes seem, it's in that darkness that the light sort of, can shine, because there are a number of young people I know who are getting fed up of the incoherence of, and they're seeing it. And that's why it's so important to then step in and say, okay, so you've recognized that. Well, here's a coherent vision from our creator.
Listen, I mean, Catherine, I think spot on. And I think, we have to have this hopeful message. And I'm glad you brought this up, because, I mean, it kind of sounds quite negative, doesn't it, really, just to say all the things that I've said. But we have to be really hopeful here, because however pervasive or persuasive this culture is, and let's face it, it is, that even though it's saying to us, parents, your last week, priests and others who had kind of formative roles in the past, your moral throwbacks, right? Despite all of that being said to us, despite all of these things, that I really firmly believe that parents, if they're switched on to their mission, then they can have a profound influence in their children's lives, and so we need to be really, really hopeful. And I think you mentioned, sorry, Catherine, if I've hijacked your kind of question there, but the other thing is you kind of reminded me of this idea of authentic witnesses, really, because you're absolutely right. I think with this generation, I mean, despite all that's going on around them, I think they can see through a lot of the rubbish, really. And when they see authentic witnesses, so whether it's their parents, whether it's other role models, and so on, I think this generation does sit up and listen, because there are many kind of influences around them which are not authentic. And I think part of what this generation is looking for is an authenticity. Sometimes it's a raw authenticity, but it is authenticity nonetheless. And I think if we can tap into that as educators, we can help these young people really to see beyond the kind of this low level of pleasure and instant gratification to things which are much more beautiful and noble and truly align with their long-term interests.
Yeah, beautifully put. You spoke there about hope, and we spoke about confidence and parents losing their confidence, which brings me back to what you mentioned there at the beginning, your initiative, Pro Parent, which is fantastic and much needed. And I will, as I say, I'll put a link there that people can look at. But who is it aimed at? Is it Catholic parents, all parents? What might people expect, and what have you found the outcomes, the results to be of those that have been involved in the past?
Well, so this initiative has only been going for about 6 months or so. My first hub was back in December. So I just called up a few friends and said, look, can you just help me get this thing going? Can you get a number of families together? And as I mentioned, we now have about 25 across the UK, with about 10 in the pipeline, and all over the place, really. So now there are hubs in Ireland, so Limerick, Galway, Dublin about to start, Glasgow as well. So several hubs we're hoping to launch there. I've already been to Glasgow to run a conference there, but we hope to start a number of hubs. I'm going back there in October. But coming down, Manchester, there are 3 hubs in Manchester, Cambridge, 4 hubs in Cambridge, Birmingham, Dartford, starting hubs now in Bristol and Leicester, a hub in Aberystwyth, so right there on the west coast in Wales, all around the home counties and so on. And so this has all kind of exploded really over the past six months or so. And as I was saying before, Catherine, so this involves well, first of all, kind of finding hub leaders, right? So that this is really important to kind of find these hub leaders, people who are willing to kind of find another 4, 5, 6 couples who are willing to come together in this way. And these hubs are taking place in different locations. So mainly in people's homes, but some in parish halls as well. In fact, my work with parishes is beginning to kind of pick up. So there are a couple of parish priests that I'm going to visit next week in the London area who would like to start some kind of parish-based initiatives, really. So this is going to be a new development. So I haven't started that work yet. But when I go into these hubs, what happens? So I give a 40-minute talk. And hard to believe listening to me now that I limit myself to 40 minutes, but I do have my watch on the table. And then that's followed by a 20-minute question and answer session. So the hubs can either take place in the evening when parents have organised some kind of childcare, or sometimes, or mainly at the weekends when they'll have someone looking after the children, whilst I have that 1 hour with the parents. And the topics are all focused around relationships and parenting. And really, kind of in a nutshell, I don't want to kind of bore you too much with this, but in a nutshell, the main idea really is that happiness is possible, right, in family life and in our relationships as a couple by following simple parenting and relationship habits that have been time tested over time, and that I've seen thousands of couples successfully master, really. Because I think so often we're told that there are all sorts of rocket science strategies that that we need to employ in our parenting, or there's so much confusion. The 5 tips of this, the 7 kind of strategies of that, really. So these simple parenting and relationship habits that I try to promote, simple to understand, difficult to practice, because I think if it was really straightforward, then possibly we wouldn't have all the kind of problems in families that we have nowadays. But these are time-tested, simple habits that work, importantly, really, and that give parents the confidence to raise their children well.
And looking at the relationship as well between the husband and wife, as well as the parents, because
yes,
I know Peter Kreeft has a lovely pithy small statement where he says the best thing a father can do for his child is love their mother, and the best thing a mother can do for her child is love their father.
absolutely.
And not to imagine it's all this way, but if this way is good, then the rest follows. So that's fantastic. That's great. And look out for a hub near you, by the sounds of it, I would say, because they're all over. It's great that it is growing, and that it's available, that this idea that people can get together wherever and reach out and support one another, because there's also a sense in which we're isolated. And in our isolation, we sometimes feel so alone that it can lead you to sort of give up. And so even the strength of another 1 or 2 or 3 couples to get together and say, yes, this is a difficulty we face. Let's pray for one another. Let's strengthen each other, however it is, however it looks. Is so important. And so there'll be. Would this be something that's just ongoing, or did you say it was a set time, a meeting over a 6 weeks period? Or
yes, no, very good, thank you. And my dream, Catherine, to be honest, is to establish a network that maybe is 50 hubs strong around the UK, so that someone who wanted to belong to a hub, there would be a hub not too far away from you, as it were. So that's my goal. But to do this, I recognize that I'm going to have to engage with lots of people, and some specialists and speakers who I may not know yet, really, because there's no way that I'm going to be able to get to 50 hubs plus without having a more extensive of network of speakers and specialists to kind of tap into. So I mean, I've started that work already. So there are a number of people that I've been liaising with who are quite keen to get involved. So that's a kind of an ongoing thing, really. But the idea with the hubs is that so first of all, they're open to all, so people of all faiths and denominations. They're free. They're free of charge.
To interrupt, Ciro, maybe also, I know myself, I'm a stepmother. I'm on a second marriage, and that's something that has, that's between me and God. But we're parents nonetheless, step parents and parents of our own. This is not excluding such families. So if there are families who felt, I have stepchildren, is this something I can be involved in? That's
absolutely.
completely open to
Absolutely.
them. Yeah.
No, 100%. So
Yeah.
this is really genuinely open,
Yeah.
open to
Open
all.
to all
In
parents.
fact, I can think of a number of hubs where single mums have come along
Yeah.
as well. So no, this is it's really important to me. I mean, one of the kind of foundational principles of this initiative was that it would be open to everybody, really. So no one would ever come along and feel uncomfortable. Let's put it that way
Yeah.
by that formational content, really. And then it's also free of charge for everybody. So there's no big reveal. It's not like in session number 3, I'm going to say, this is all about money. So I feel really strongly about this point. And so my professional work, so that brings in that income, and this work I'm doing pro bono, really, because I feel that it's really, really important. There are many forces working against us. We've discussed some of those strong cultural forces working against parents, working against families. And on the other side of the equation, we're not always well organized enough, and we don't always have the kind of professional resources to be able to dedicate to that fight, really. So I want to make, I don't want to kind of create any barriers for anybody, either in terms of their own particular situation or financial situation or anything like that. So the hubs are open to all, free of charge. And also in terms of commitment, it's a very kind of natural, I mean, it's a fairly straightforward kind of commitment in inverted commas. So there's no kind of monthly or weekly session that people are having to attend. Rather, then what tends to happen is that there's a natural 3 or 4 month break between each of the talks. Now, what I've done is I put together a cycle of 5 cycles, 5 key areas in this whole business of relationships and parenting. Each cycle has 4 talks. So in principle, there are 20 talks. Now, for one cycle, so if I'm going back every 3 or 4 months, and there are 4 talks in each cycle, so one cycle will last a year. So if a hub wanted to go on this journey, then it could be a 5-year journey. But what I say to everybody is, after the first talk, if you want to stop there, then that's fine, right? That's absolutely fine. We've had this lovely evening together, and that's okay. But in every case, the hub leaders have got in touch with me and said, look, can we book the next 2 or 3 sessions? And then I say to them, well, at least we need to make a commitment to one cycle, to 4 talks, really. And so the first cycle is all about building healthy foundations, relationships in the home. So if we can at least commit to those four talks, then I can organize my time accordingly. But this journey can be as short or as long as the hubs want them to be. And the intervals, these 3 or 4 month intervals, it's basically when they're available and when I'm available. So we just look at our calendars and we organize it that way. And the wonderful thing is that in the interim, between these breaks, different hubs are doing different things, really. So there's one hub in the Dulwich area, for example. So I'm going to that hub, I think, in a couple of weeks' time, and I went back and I was there in February. Yeah. And what they've done in between is that they've had they've run a kind of film club, where they've got all the parents together to watch a film and discuss it. I think they've also had a book club as well. Other hubs are just getting together for socials, just coming together for a barbecue or whatever. And other hubs are not getting together at all, right? Just waiting for me to come back. So there's a lot of kind of flexibility in all of this, really. But my goal is to establish this platform, this network, really, that can be the building blocks of something solid, really. That is not just a firework that goes off and creates a little bit of heat and light, but something that can act as a foundation, really, for supporting parents over time. So a journey, really, an accompaniment. This is what I'm hoping to achieve.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Well, you heard it here. If there's any way in which you feel you may be called to be involved, to support,
absolutely,
and do reach out on an email that will be on the flyer, in the link below, and get involved, and let's see this build and develop, because it's a fantastic initiative. Parents really do need strengthening, and community, and not to feel alone against the pressures coming. What, if I can just maybe finish by asking you, because I'm a teacher and have taught for over 20 years, and you yourself were a headmaster for a long time, and it seems like one of the particular sort of battlegrounds at the moment is schools, and I think it would be good to have maybe some words about how parents can have better relationships with schools, and schools have better relationships with parents in particular, so that they don't feel they're pulling against each other, but working together. What do you think?
Wow, really, really important area, and something that I'm asked a lot, really. Sometimes after I've given that talk in the question and answer session, it's almost, let's ignore whatever the guy said, let's just ask about our relationship with schools. And it's a complex question, really. And I think you've alluded to some of those complexities in your recent articles, Catherine. I mean, I think at a basic level, we need to be alert. We need to as you mentioned, we need to be switched on. So we need to be reading those school policies. We need to be asking questions, really. And I think we can do that very charitably, very politely. So when we're asking these questions of the head teacher or of school leaders, really, let's start from the premise that these are good people who want to do the right thing, and want to engage with us positively. So for me, when I engage with anybody, really, I always assume goodwill on their part, really, and before having to kind of assume otherwise, really, because it's a tough job being a head teacher. It's a tough job being a teacher, and I think sometimes schools can go into a kind of defensive mode, really, and we can be quite critical of the schools and say, but here are all the things that you're doing wrong. But what they've done is kind of the mindset is one of embattlement and so on and so forth. So I say that as a kind of a starter, really, but the reality is that sometimes we've asked those questions politely, we've tried to engage positively with those school leaders, and it's clear that relationship is going to be difficult and it's going to be complex, and that perhaps we're not getting the answers that we were hoping for, that we're not getting the kind of engagement or the response that we feel we're entitled to as parents, because we are the primary educators, really. So I think I think the first thing I would say is that understand what your rights within the school are. I mean, obviously with things like RSHE, when it comes to the sex education element of it, you have a right to be able to withdraw your child. Unfortunately, you don't have a veto, as we're constantly being reminded by education ministers and so on anything else, really. But interestingly, I thought it was really kind of an interesting comment. I think Nick Gibb, who's the school's minister, he mentioned recently this idea that you don't have a veto, but you can make a complaint, right? And I thought, well, maybe in some cases that may be warranted, really. So, if after having tried to engage positively, try to be productive and so on, you find that you're hitting your head against a brick wall, I think, get together with maybe one or two other like-minded parents, and if necessary, you put together a very polite but clear, kind of, you make a clear complaint to the head teacher and so on about why you feel perhaps in this particular area your rights as parents have been encroached. And so I think you exercise those rights, and I think ultimately, I mean, the way I'd put it is this, really, Catherine, that I think there's a certain kind of threshold of negativity, if you like, with some of the influences in schools that we can tolerate as parents, right? And sometimes we can transform that negativity as well into something good, right? So I'm just, one example. I remember when my kids, I had two boys who were in the local grammar school, and on one or two occasions they were asked, as part of their RE lessons, to write one or two pieces, and I can't quite remember the context, but I remember one of my sons writing something about pro-life and giving all the reasons why this is really important, so on, and came back with the equivalent of an F, had been completely shot to pieces. And I was so proud of him. And I said, look, this is great. The fact that you've been shot down here, this is wonderful. And so this is an opportunity for us as a family to really reinforce our identity, our culture, that look, we're a little bit different, right? So everybody else there in the class maybe is championing X, Y, and Z, but we have we're different values, and so we turn that into a something positive, really. So, but the issue here is that whilst there is a certain kind of tolerance of those negativities, if you like, and sometimes we can transform them and turn them into something good, really, to reinforce the culture within our family. On other occasions, those negatives become too corrosive. Right? So, they're corrosive, and I think at that point, we need to really think carefully as parents. So we've gone through all those we've tried all those positive engagements. We've tried turning some of those negatives into positives, but still those negatives are just far too corrosive. They're really undermining the formation in conscience, in freedom, in virtue that we're teaching our kids. And then we've got to decide at that point, right? Do we change school? If we have maybe because it's just gone too far. Do we homeschool? I think you raised this in your article, I mean, I say this, and I'm happy to even plug it, really, in that sense. But I've become quite good friends with the governors of the Regina Caeli School in Hertfordshire.
Oh, yeah.
And so the Regina Caeli School, which is a kind of hybrid school, so 2 days a week the children are in school, 3 days a week they homeschool. And and things I can see why for some parents the things become so corrosive that they feel, well, in order to really raise my children well in this area, we need to do we need to kind of act, really. And even if that sounds quite drastic to some people, I understand why they're doing it, really. So it's a spectrum, really, of responses. That I think, I don't know if that's helpful.
Very, very helpful. Thank you. That's fantastic. I think that's brilliant advice to assume goodwill. We know teachers have a hard job. Absolutely, we do. And they're under enormous pressure as well. Turn that frown upside down to a certain extent, but there will come a point where you do bang your head against the wall and you can't. So then if that point comes and you've tried everything, then yes, just to look at fellow supportive parents and if necessary, drawing more attention to the concern through a complaint and so on. But I think that's lovely. And your story there about your son, I think it was, who got the F for his pro-life essay. I think what's lovely about that is it's what is the end. So ultimately, if we make the end of education the telos of everything we're doing about grades, then that might be an upsetting thing. But because we know it's not, actually, it's about educating the human person to become who God's created them to be. And you'd rather get an F but defending life than an A not defending life. And so then that becomes a celebration of something better and something good. So I think that's lovely. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me this morning, Ciro. I'm really, really thrilled to hear all about your work, and so glad that it's happening, because there are times when I worry about my own grandchildren and how they'll cope as parents if it's tough now. But as I said, in the darkness there are these pockets of light, and they'll grow. And so I think this Pro Parent initiative is absolutely fantastic. So please do, after listening to Ciro today, get in touch, get involved, take a look and see how you could take part and help this to grow. But for now, thank you so much. And thank you for introducing us to Tom, who's a lovely young man as well.
All right. Thank you very much indeed,
All right,
Catherine.
take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.